Summary of Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. This novel is about two main characters, Hazel Motes and Enoch Emery. Hazel, also known as Hayes, is from the small town of East Rod. All of his family members have died, and he has nowhere to go after being in the army. He grew up in a Christian family and wanted to become a preacher like his grandfather. His grandfather taught him a strong sense of his own guilt and the urgency of sin, both of which need the saving power of Jesus Christ. But while he is in the army, Hazel changes his mind and becomes a strong atheist. As Hazel makes his way to a new life in Tockenham, he has a string of awkward and angry interactions with people who often mistake him for a preacher. He gets into a fight with Mrs. Wally B. Hitchcock on the train, and a porter who Hazel thinks is from East Rod locks him in his berth after he has a nightmare about coffins. Another fight breaks out over his identity as a preacher with the cab driver who takes Hazel from the train station to the prostitute Mrs. Leora Watts's house, whose address Hazel finds in a bathroom stall. As soon as Leora tells Hazel, "Mama don't care," he sleeps with her. It's the first time he's been with a woman. The next morning, he meets Asa Hawkes, a blind priest, and his daughter Sabbath Lily. He follows them, and then he meets Enoch Emery, an 18-year-old new worker at the Tockenham Zoo. Being in a fight with Asa Hawkes makes Hazel decide to start the church without Christ and spread his message that Jesus is lying, everyone is clean, and there is no such thing as sin or salvation. With $40, Hazel gets himself a beat-up old Essex that barely runs, but he is sure it is perfect. He finds Enoch at the zoo, but Enoch won't give him the Hawkes address. He stays at the Hawkes boarding house and rents a room upstairs one night after following them home. He plans to seduce Sabbath, his daughter, as a way to show Asa how strongly he feels, but he doesn't expect Sabbath to try to seduce him back. She is smart, experienced, and persistent. Hazel starts preaching from the top of his car outside of movie theaters, but he doesn't get any followers. The only one who does is Ani J. Holy, whose real name is Hoover Schultz, but he turns out to be a con artist who only wants to use Hazel's platform to make money. When Hazel turns him down, showing that the new Jesus he had been talking about was just a figure of speech, Schultz hires Solace Layfield to pretend to be Hazel and starts preaching across the street from him. Hazel is greatly affected by seeing his double and learning that Asa Hawkes is a liar. Hawkes lost his nerve and failed to blind himself in his early days as a dedicated preacher, but then he pretended to be blind. When Hazel gets home in his car, Sabbath is already in bed. He takes off everything but his hat, which she does for him while calling him the king of the beasts as he finally gives in to her advances. The next day, Hazel makes up her mind to run away from the city, but she seems to lose it when Sabbath walks through the opening holding a mummy that Enoch delivered that morning, making an image of the Madonna. After Hazel smashes the mummy, he follows his fake self, Solace Layfield, that night and confronts him in his car. Solace is told by Hazel to take off his suit and hat. Hazel then kills Solace by running him over with his car. Enoch is an 18-year-old boy who lives alone in Tockenham and works at the city zoo. He has lived there for 2 months. He is more animal than Hazel, who is more spiritual. He is deeply affected by food, women, animals, and any kind of violence. Enoch is probably crazy, but he is driven by what he calls his wise blood. When Enoch meets Hazel for the first time, he follows her around like a lost dog looking for a friend. After that, he drags Hazel into his daily routine in the city park because he wants to show her the dark secret heart of the city that only he knows about, a corpse that has been shrunk down in the city museum. When Enoch tries to follow Hazel, she throws a stone at his head and runs away. Later, even though Enoch tried to avoid its call, he found himself following the words of his wise blood. He cleans up a cabinet in his room that looks like a tabernacle and then feels driven to go to the movies. He finally leaves during a movie about an orangutan saving children from a burning building because Enoch really doesn't like animals. After the event, Hazel preached about the need for a new Jesus. This is when Enoch realized that his job was to steal the shrinking man from the museum. Now this is what the closet in his room is ready to hold. While Enoch is on his way to give Hazel the body, he comes across a marketing event for Gonga the gorilla. The star will be there to greet a line of waiting children, and Enoch feels terrible about what he did. Enoch waits in line, ready for his supreme moment when he will insult the gorilla. But when he takes Gonga's warm hand, the first person to offer it to him since he got to Talkenham, he starts talking about himself and his life. Behind the gorilla mask is a real person who leans forward and tells Enoch to go to hell. Enoch is embarrassed and runs away. After giving the broken package to Sabbath Hawks, Enoch waits for his reward from the new Jesus. He finds it in an ad for Gonga's last showing in the newspaper. The gorilla and Enoch sneak into the back of the truck, where Enoch kills him with the broken end of his umbrella. After getting out of the truck, Enoch takes off all of his clothes, buries them, and then puts on the gorilla suit. It was the happiest moment of his life. Around the edge of the trees, he sees a couple. He tries to shake their hands, but they run away. He is left to sit and look out over the city by himself. In the meantime, Hazel has cleaned Solace's blood off of his car and has decided to never come back to the city again. He is excited to start a new life somewhere else. He is stopped by an angry police officer 5 miles out of town on the highway. The officer tricks him into driving to the top of a hill and then pushes his car off the edge. At that moment, Hazel seems to pull away from everyone else and doesn't say anything to the police officer. He walks back to town 5 miles, buys some lime in a bucket, and then blinds himself, just like Asa had promised to do years before but didn't. His landlord, Mrs. Flood, becomes more and more interested in Hazel's strange behavior as he continues to live a monk-like life in the house, throwing away any extra money he doesn't pay for rent and barely talking to anyone. Mrs. Flood finds out that Hazel walks miles every day in shoes full of glass and stones and that he has barbed wire around his chest. Hazel tells Mrs. Flood that he needs to pay and that he is dirty when she questions him about this. Mrs. Flood wants to marry him because she is becoming more and more interested in the secrets that drive Hazel. After Mrs. Flood's offer, Hazel gets ready and heads outside into a cold storm. 2 days later, 2 police officers find him. One of them hits Hazel over the head with a billy club and kills him. The police give Hazel to Mrs. Flood because they think he is still living. She props up his dead body on her bed and closes her eyes as she stares into his empty eye holes. She imagines the dark world inside him slowly going away until there is only one point of light left.
About the author. Mary Flannery O'Connor was born in Georgia and was the daughter of a real estate agent. She went to Georgia State College for Women to study social sciences and then went to the famous Iowa Writers' Workshop to study, where she started writing what would become Wise Blood. She wrote many essays, 2 novels, and 2 collections of short stories over the course of her work. She was a pious Catholic who paid close attention to how people lived in the South. O'Connor was given 5 years to live after being diagnosed with lupus, the same disease that killed her father. She chose to stay on her family's farm for 14 more years and raise birds and write. Many awards and honors have been given to her work, and she is now seen as one of the most important American writers of the 20th century.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.